I have decided this morning that I will speak about smoking, addiction to nicotine. And if we have time, I want to speak a little bit about that aspect of smoking that is vaping. So that, a lot of people have, at the end of this program, I'm hoping that you, our listeners, will understand a little bit more about the dynamics that is involved in this smoking habit, how it develops, what are some of the ill effects of it, the dangers of it, and of course, a little bit about vaping. This program is going to be divided into two parts. So, in part one, we're going to be talking about smoking, and then hopefully, if we have time, we'll speak about vaping as well. So that at the end of it, you'll understand what is involved, what are the ill effects, and hopefully, I will share with you some ways of how you can deal with it. If you have a problem with smoking and if you would like to stop, I have been able to help thousands of people with smoking addiction, and I will be quite willing to, hopefully, to share that with you this morning. So, smoking continues to pose severe health risks and affects nearly every organ in the body. You know, I remember in primary school hearing a little young man saying that, if God intended for us to smoke, He put a chimney on our head because, that was our understanding. If you have smoke coming out somewhere, you want to have some way for it to get out. In the cars, you have a muffler, and in houses, you have chimney, and in factories, you have these big chimneys they have. Anyway, uh, just to accentuate the importance and effect of breathing. We can do without food for days. We can do without water even for days. We can do without clothing for a long time. I mean, and we can do without house, properties, all of those things. But we can't do without air. After 1 minute, the cells start dying. And what does that mean? It translates to the fact that among all the things we have available to us, breathing air is the most important to sustain life. And this is why in Hindi, the word for breath is prana, and the word for life is also prana. They are interchangeable, so that what's the first thing we do when we come in the world? We take a breath. That's why we get this slap in the butt and we scream out so the lung starts working. And the last thing we will do before we leave this world, we exit, is to exhale. So we take one breath in at the beginning and then we one breath out at the end. So the whole of life is really dependent on the breath. And when we are smoking, what are we doing? We are damaging our breathing apparatus, which is the root of a life, actually. We are hitting at the very root of life itself. It is estimated for every cigarette we smoke, we cut short at least 7 minutes of our life. But it is not only a question of shortening our lifespan, it is also, more importantly, that we are also depleting and degenerating and compromising the quality of our life. So that one of the first things that comes up when we think about smoking is the whole question of lung cancer. But there are other consequences. It is estimated that 85% of the cases of lung cancer is as a result of smoking cigarettes. Let us look at this in a very common sense approach. When we put a cigarette in our mouth and we light it and we pull the air through the cigarette, the mere fact that the cigarette brightens up, it means that it is burning out the oxygen. That means that the air that is going into the lung now has less oxygen in it. And the fact that it has smoke, which is very uncomfortable to the flora in the lung. You know, if you hold it for too long, especially when you just started smoking, you will start a cough because the lung is signaling that, look, this thing is toxic. You know, I need to get rid of it. So you can't keep the breath of air long enough in the lung. Now, what happens in the lungs? The blood from all parts of the body goes to the heart, and the heart sends it through very fine capillaries around the wall of the lungs and the outside. On the inside is the lung. They are what you call alveoli or air sacs. And the walls of these air sacs are very thin, and they are lined with the blood capillaries on the outside. And there's a process called osmosis, where the waste material, the urea and all of those things from the body is transferred to the bloodstream and from the lungs, and also the blood vessels pick up oxygen from these air sacs. There's that transfer. It takes up the waste and it also collects oxygen. The waste will be taken to the kidneys to be filtered and excreted, but the oxygen is taken to every single cell. There are billions of cells in the body, brain cells, body tissues, and every single one of these cells need to get oxygen in order to stay alive. So the heart is sending the blood to pick up a trip, let's suppose, of oxygen. But because of the smoking, the air is not kept long enough in the lungs. The air does not have sufficient oxygen in it. So that compromises the transfer process. But more than that is over time. You know, I want you to follow this with me. You know, I saw this even as a young man. Somebody demonstrated you pull a cigarette and you blow it onto a white kerchief and you see the kerchief turn brown. That is carbon. Now, every one of these things that I refer to, you can test it out. It has been tested. So that every time you pull a cigarette, and in this case, even marijuana, anything that we are smoking, vaping, all of that, the carbon and all of these chemicals that is present in the vape and in the smoke and in the cigarette and in the marijuana, the THC and the CBD and all of those things, these things go into the lungs. And the tubes that go to these air sacs are so fine, you have to look at them under a microscope. They're so tiny. And what happens? Eventually, they get clogged. These chemicals and oils and all kind of impurities and so on, they clog these passages that go to the air sacs. And then the air sacs die. When all of these air sacs die, they deteriorate and they form the ideal basis for the growth of cancer and other COPD and bronchitis and all kinds of respiratory illnesses, asthma and all of those. So that now, because of that, the function of the lung is compromised. In the case of vaping, you have a condition called popcorn lungs, where the lung literally, the air sac starts to become like popcorn and they become non-functional. And why I chose to speak about this morning, just this week, this past week gone here, I have a very close relative who I care about, who I know has been vaping, and he got very, very ill. You know, and I started to do the research. And what I'm realizing, even when you go on social media and you look at a lot of the experiences, the actual people who have been vaping, they are all very young people, like in their 20s, and they are already having very serious health conditions as a result. They are suffering with COPD, popcorn lungs, short breath, even heart conditions. And young people are actually dying from this. And not much is being said. I am from old school, and we have not really been looking at this for very long. This is a new vaping, for instance, came around as a substitute for people who would like to give up cigarette smoking. And they started to vape. And we saw it initially as a useful alternative for instead of nicotine patches and all of that. People will have these e-cigarettes, as you call them, and they will vape, and they were able to stay off the cigarettes. And we thought initially that, wait, this was a good thing. It could help people to stop smoking, not realizing at the time that this could turn into a worse nemesis, a worse problem than smoking itself. And what they are finding too is that a lot of people who can't afford the vaping or can't access it conveniently, they are going back. Some people are who might have started with vaping have now gone on to actual cigarettes, because some of them are even arguing cigarettes are more safer, because the ancestors smoked for a long time. And I am not suggesting that it is. Nicotine is a very serious drug. If we could isolate nicotine, one drop of it can kill an adult human being. It is deadly, it is potent, but we get little bits of it when we're smoking. So coming back to the explanation I was giving earlier on, when we are smoking, the air sacs, the lung capacity starts to diminish with all the tar from marijuana and the oils and the chemicals from vaping. Because now in vaping in the United States, I don't know if it is happening here, but it is, whatever happens in the United States, very quickly, if they get if, if they get flu, we get pneumonia here. You understand? We copy what is happening in the US, and information is moving so fast, and commodities, and people are able to access all of these things online, have it shipped overnight, and all of that, so that if it is happening in the States, it's happening here. What is happening in the States? In fact, the President of the United States, that was one of his main reasons for slapping tariffs. And I don't want to become political here in Canada. He said because the fentanyl, which is a deadly drug that is being used in the United States, is coming through Canada, to the extent where the Canadian government have decided that they are going to, put extra guards to prevent more security in place to prevent the crossing of fentanyl into the United States. So that a lot of chemicals, dangerous chemicals, are put in these vaping liquids that is being used. Then there are the ones that are sealed, disposable, where you don't know what's in there. And the people who are marketing these things, not all of it comes under strict supervision from the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. And in Trinidad, well, it's a free-for-all. Here, we don't have, as far as I know, any strict kind of policies in place to test these e-cigarettes. And the vape shops advertising, they're all over the place. So that I would like to go more into depth about the whole question of smoking, vaping, marijuana. All of these, they hit at the respiratory system. And even though we may live for a long time, limping through life, there are people who are breathing through straws, as they say now, because the lung has been compromised. They have to be carrying extra oxygen producing machines, and they have these um, sprays and all kinds of things that they have to use, and the whole of life gets compromised. Now, just before we close this segment, I want to let our listeners know that the breath is not only a function of keeping us alive through supplying us with oxygen and excreting the urea. If we breathe out on a glass, you'd see vapor on the glass. And that is actually the content in that. It may not sound very pleasant, but it is the same content as the urine, because we excrete much more out of the breath than through the genitals. And that is a very important function to save the kidneys. You know, we can actually, the skin through sweat and the breath through breathing process does a lot of work to save the kidneys overload, to the extent where I have seen research being done in India now where people, rather than go for dialysis, they go and sit in a hot bath in a tank with warm water, which helps to open up pores and sweat, and it takes the burden off the kidneys to the extent where it is claimed that they don't need to have dialysis. Now, that is something I think we need to look into. So, as I said earlier on, this program is divided into two. We'll pause here and we'll come back and look at some of the actual ill effects of smoking, vaping, marijuana use, and all of those things that we use to the lungs. We'll come back and look at that. So we go back to the station, take a few commercials, and we'll come back again.